Abandoned buildings are an eerie reminder of a time long past. Whether it's a forgotten factory, a derelict mansion, or a deserted hospital, these places evoke a strange mixture of nostalgia and unease. Many have stood empty for decades, gradually crumbling away, yet they still hold an air of mystery. But sometimes, the emptiness of these buildings can make people feel that something far more sinister lurks within their crumbling walls. For those who dare to venture inside, abandoned buildings often hold more than just dust and decay. They can hide disturbing secrets, things that should never have been left behind, or worse, things that still call those places home. Here are 3 true creepy abandoned building horror stories that will make you think twice before stepping foot into any long-forgotten structure. Story 1. The sinister echoes of an abandoned mental institution. In the late 1800s, the Rolling Hills Asylum in East Bethany, New York, was opened to treat the mentally ill. Over the years, the institution gained a notorious reputation, not only for the cruel treatments endured by its patients, but for the ghostly stories that began to emerge in the 20th century. By the time the building closed in 1974, the asylum was a decrepit, overrun institution that had seen decades of mistreatment, neglect, and even death. The building was left abandoned for years, and in 2000, a group of urban explorers and paranormal investigators decided to enter the asylum. They had heard the stories of paranormal activity, the sounds of chains rattling, eerie whispers, and sightings of shadowy figures, and they were eager to experience it for themselves. As they ventured through the vast hallways of the asylum, they found rooms filled with old, rusting equipment, overturned chairs, and files that had long since been scattered. But what stood out the most was the oppressive atmosphere. The air seemed thick with something malevolent, as if the very walls had absorbed the suffering that had taken place within them. One of the explorers, David, later described the experience in chilling detail. "We had made our way to the old isolation rooms, where they used to keep the most disturbed patients. I'll never forget the feeling of being watched. It was like someone was right behind me, breathing down my neck. But when I turned around, there was no one there." But it wasn't just the feeling of being watched that unsettled them. As they explored further, the group began hearing strange noises, soft footsteps behind them, doors creaking open on their own, and faint voices, as if someone was whispering their names. At one point, the group split up to explore different parts of the building. David and 2 others went down into the basement. As they made their way through the dark, damp hallways, they heard the unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut behind them. Panicked, they ran back, but as they reached the stairwell, they saw a tall, dark figure standing at the top of the stairs. The figure didn't move, just stood there staring down at them. The explorers, frozen in place, couldn't take their eyes off it. Then, as if on cue, the figure vanished into thin air. Terrified, the group fled the building and never returned. David would later admit that he was certain that someone had been watching them from the darkness that day. Afterward, others who had ventured into the asylum reported similar experiences, an overwhelming sense of being followed, the sound of chains dragging across the floor, and inexplicable cold spots. The Rolling Hills Asylum remains one of the most haunted abandoned buildings in the United States, a place where the echoes of the past refuse to fade. Story 2. The Lonely Ghost of the Lady in Black. The old Nubai McMahon Hotel in Colorado Springs was once a luxurious, thriving place of business in the late 1800s. But by the mid-20th century, after the decline of the railroad and changes in the economy, the hotel fell into disrepair and was eventually abandoned. Now, only a few crumbling walls and a shadow of the grandeur that once stood there remain. Despite the hotel's neglect, there was still one thing that kept drawing people to the building: a legend of a ghost known as the Lady in Black. Locals who had passed by the hotel late at night told stories of seeing a shadowy figure moving behind the broken windows, dressed in an old-fashioned black gown. But the most disturbing part was the cold, heart-wrenching sound of a woman sobbing that seemed to emanate from within. In 2005, a group of ghost hunters decided to investigate the abandoned hotel after hearing the stories from locals. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and EVP, electronic voice phenomena, devices, they entered the hotel one crisp autumn evening. The group set up in the grand lobby, a cavernous room with faded wallpaper and broken chandeliers, where they would begin their investigation. At first, the group found little, just the usual creaking of the old building and the occasional draft. But as the night went on, strange things began to happen. The temperature in the lobby dropped drastically, even though the weather outside was mild. One of the investigators, Anna, claimed she felt a heavy, oppressive presence behind her as she walked toward the staircase. When she turned, there was nothing there. It wasn't until they reached the second floor that things took a darker turn. The group heard the unmistakable sound of a woman crying softly. The sound seemed to come from the direction of one of the old guest rooms. As they approached the room, the crying grew louder, more anguished. The door to the room was ajar, but when the group entered, there was no one inside. Only the cold, empty space of the room remained. Then one of the investigators, Dave, pointed toward the corner of the room and whispered, "Do you see that?" The others turned and gasped. In the far corner of the room, standing by the window, was the figure of a woman dressed in black. Her face was obscured by shadows, but her posture was unmistakable. She seemed to be gazing out the window as though waiting for something. The group's cameras were rolling, but none of them could get a clear shot of her. As they moved closer, the woman in black vanished, leaving only a lingering chill in the air. As they left the hotel that night, they couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Something, or someone, had been watching them from the darkness. To this day, the lady in black is still a prominent figure in local folklore, and her sobbing can sometimes be heard by those brave enough to stand near the abandoned hotel after dark. Many believe that her spirit is tied to the hotel's tragic past, and that she's forever trapped in the building, waiting for something or someone that will never return. Abandoned buildings are far more than just decaying structures. They are relics of forgotten histories, haunted by the souls of those who once lived and worked within them. From the tortured spirits of a cruel asylum to the restless echoes of a long-dead factory workforce, these places hold stories that are dark, disturbing, and in some cases, unsolved. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, it's hard to ignore the unsettling energy that permeates these forgotten buildings, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to explore.